This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Lessons Learned. And today I have Suzy Unger on with me, and Suzy and I have gotten to know each other over the last year. Now, we've gotten to know each other like so many other people through Zoom, email, text messages, um, but there's a lot we don't know about each other. And the one thing I do know about Suzy, she's a daughter, a sister, a wife. She's a mom to fur babies.
Yes.
Yeah. And she's a friend to many. But you started out your early career as an agent. Um, and I'm sure a lot of people looked at you and said, wow, what a life that is. You did that for a long time.
Mhm,
Then you sort of have made a transition into being a therapist.
mhm,
And probably were somewhat of a therapist as an agent, I would have.
mhm.
Um, and now you're also a podcaster.
I can't believe it.
Like, how did you get through all those changes?
It's so crazy when you think about it that way. So, first of all, thank you for having me, Karen. I'm really excited. Yeah, I was in the entertainment business for about 25 years. I started at CNN when they called it Chicken Noodle News. And actually, the only way I got there was that when I was in college, I was at NYU. The shortest line for internships was this brand new network called CNN. There were only three networks then. It was ABC, NBC, CBS. The line was short at CNN. So I thought, I'll just go to CNN. And I started my career at CNN and really loved sort of the storytelling part of it and worked my way through the ranks and ended up becoming, I was at Disney for 8 years, and then I became what's called a packaging agent, meaning I represented a lot of production companies and talent and ideas and packaged them together and went out and sold them. And at the time that I started, Mark Itkin, who I say is the father of reality television and still a very dear friend and producer, um, there were five of us doing it. And we were seen as like the bastard children on the bottom. Like the movie people were way more important. And all of a sudden, reality television, we started selling shows and it just became a phenomenon. And what's interesting as I look back on that is that I was living a red carpet life, but I was actually a reality show waiting to happen. I had a little secret that no one knew, or they did know, but I was in denial of, which was I was struggling from anorexia. And because this is Hollywood, and because I was successful, and because I could dress myself up, I was seen as successful and smart and thin, which meant to me, oh, it's all working, until it almost killed me. And I ended up going to rehab for 8 months and realizing like, this is not for me anymore. I was told that I would never recover. I was told I was in my 40s, I'm now 58, and I was told, you're way too old. And people who have had this disease for this long usually don't recover. And I spent like the first 3 months in rehab really wondering, am I going to die in here? What have I done to myself? And so I really do think of my life as a miracle right now, that I do have angels around me. But I also know that the work in television and Hollywood and the smoke and mirrors of it all was really just smoke and mirrors, but it gave me an education. And I ended up going to grad school at 50 and now being a licensed therapist.
So, when you were going through all this, um, did your husband notice that there was something wrong?
Everyone noticed that there was
They all
something wrong.
did. Okay.
Everyone noticed.
Okay.
In fact, there were so many times that people were so concerned. Friends tried to do interventions and I would get angry at them and I would lie to them. But there's something cognitively happens when you're not eating your food, which is you are really not present. I was literally it was like being in a foggy dream world. And to this day, a lot of my memory is gone from those days. But yes, my husband knew, my mother knew, my friends knew, my sister knew, but I would deny it. And because I had this fancy job and because I was able to be very active and successful, I just denied it. And the work was more important than myself. And in fact, funny story, I remember I used to have to go out to breakfasts and lunches and dinners all the time. And I would be in a panic about what I would not order. And one day, Jennifer Lopez came into the agency and she brought Sprinkles cookies. And I was wearing a pink suit that was way too big for me. I would safety pin it and stuff it and had a whole thing going on. And everyone took a cupcake. And of course, I wanted to be normal. And I took a cupcake and I put it in my lap. And I forgot that it was in my lap. And she was sitting next to me. And when I stood up to say goodbye, the cupcake was stuck to my vajayjay.
Oh my, oh my God.
I mean, I had many stories like that. I remember being with Courtney Cox having dinner or having lunch at a place where we ordered some kind of chicken salad. And all I remember is that I was taking the chicken and putting it in my napkin. By the time I got back to my office, Mark Aitken called me and said, Suze, can you come into my office? And I came down the hall and he said, Courtney just called me. She thinks you might have an eating disorder. And I said, oh, Mark, please, come on. She probably has one, and shut the door. And so I was just used to just pushing it away and pushing it away because I truly, Karen, I was in denial. I did not believe that I was sick.
Wow. So 8 months
8 months.
in rehab.
8 months. So what happened was my husband and I love to cruise. I should say Henry loves to cruise. I go along for the ride. After 30 years, I'm used to cruising.
Okay.
And we went to South America during November, which is summertime then. And all I remember is being on the airplane for 1,000,000 hours and not eating one thing and getting onto the ship and falling asleep the minute we got there. And when I went to sleep, I felt my body literally lifting. And then I saw myself, I saw my body, and then I saw the top of the cruise ship. And then I saw myself up in the sky. And then something shook me and I woke up. And I know at that moment that I had probably died. And it was at that moment that I knew that I had to do something about it. And I still wasn't ready. I just thought that might mean more therapy, lie to more therapists. But at that point, therapy is really about the connection with the therapist. And I connected with the team at Montanito where I was. And I just, for the first time in my life, started to feel safe and started to talk about what was going on. And it really changed my life. Therapy changed my life.
So therapy gave you the courage to become a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about an eating disorder that's super tricky is that it's almost like a disconnected voice. I always name the voice when I'm with my client. So I'll name it Ed or Edwina or Karen or whatever it is. And then I'll separate the voice and I'll say, so what are Ed's plans for you today? Oh, okay. And when does he think that we're going to find recovery? And what starts to happen is if you externalize the voice and you separate the narrative, you start to find a healthy voice and the unhealthy voice. And this works with addiction too. And what happens is that the unhealthy voice is so loud that it drowns out the healthy voice. And the work is in identifying these two different voices and seeing that Ed is a liar and a hypocrite and a bully. And my work is to find independence, declare independence from that voice.
Absolutely.
Because that voice will actually kill you. And that's the work. That's how I work, very externally.
And I'm sure you still have to work that way even to today.
It's funny because so much of the eating disorder voice is comparison, it's perfectionism, it's unworthiness. And even though it doesn't show up in food for me, it shows up in other ways. Like when I was in grad school, if I didn't get straight A pluses, even though I didn't know that they had A pluses, then I would feel like a failure. And my therapist said, "Oh, okay, so you're not using food anymore. School is your scale." And so I look for other ways that people present their disorder or their addiction or their fear, because it usually is never what you think it is. It shows up in the room. It's usually the 12th domino. But women and food and body and the ideas that we hold about them are still to this day so sexist and racist and false, and we have to fight them.
We
So I'm really passionate about fighting those messages.
Well, it's interesting because when we started Lessons Learned, one of the things that I shared was I grew up and I knew I had love around me. Okay. But I always felt that I didn't have the love that I wanted or deserved. And so I kept struggling my whole life to have my mother say to me, "I love you," and have my father look at me as his precious little girl. Um, And it wasn't until both of them passed that I actually realized I had had it all along. But that voice inside of me for
Mhm.
all those years kept telling me I wasn't I wasn't getting it, therefore I'm not worthy. If I'm not worthy of their love, whose love am I worthy of? And so when we started this podcast, I thought it's time that we talk about these things. We talk about the fact that we are worthy and we find those special things in ourselves. However, with everything that's been going on this past year, I sometimes find that the language we use is inappropriate.
What do you mean?
So, for instance, you know, maybe I wouldn't have thought of a guy looking at me. We'll use Governor Como. Okay,
Oh,
he came on to some woman. Okay, but men that age, I grew up with them as young boys, okay? And that's how they were taught to act.
mhm.
I may not like it, but I've learned to accept it to some degree, okay? And so, again, I may not use the right language if somebody came on to me because I would, they probably wouldn't know that I was not happy with them because I've been taught to be that nice person to say, you know, thank you, but not right now, rather than, push them away and start a fight. Um, the same way growing up, I grew up with um, in a Jewish neighborhood, but we had Black families, we had Puerto Rican families, we had Italian families, and there were nicknames for all those families. They used them and we used them because we were all friends. But today, I wouldn't dare use any of those nicknames. So there's a lot of lessons that we're learning, and we're not too old to actually learn them. And I think
Oh, God, no. We're just starting. As you say that, what's coming to mind is when I was in grad school, I took a class I specialized in the LGBT area. And one of the classes, as a straight, white, cis woman of privilege, I felt like I somehow had to qualify. Like, how am I going to work with this community when I'm not part of this community? And I'm going to hold that thought and move on to I took a class called Multicultural Mental Health. And I grew up in San Francisco, and I grew up with a mother who's an activist and who was extremely liberal. And I thought there wasn't a racist bone in my body. My mother invited AIDS patients to come with us. We were ostracized from the neighborhood because of her passion for equality. We used to have the Black kids come over that were bussed for dinner. So I thought, oh, I've got this. So I take this class called Multicultural Mental Health, and it's taught by a woman named JD Fuller, who is now my partner in our podcast, Change the Narrative with JD Fuller, who is an African American male leaning lesbian who taught me day one about something that I was born with that I didn't know I had, and the access it gave me to everything that I had and knew, which was privilege. I didn't even know what that meant. And so I learned, to what you're saying, about the way that that this country has been politically constructed. And this book stamped, if you haven't read it, read it. But the way that our country has been stamped from the beginning with racism, and all the ways that systemically all the operations that are in force today are set up. And I had no idea. I was living in my own little bubble, and feeling like I'm doing it right. I have Black friends. And so now the work that I'm doing with JD is to really name my white fragility, to talk about it, to talk about privilege, to talk about this unearned right that we were born with because of the color of our skin,
Right.
and to find the voices out there who haven't been able to speak. And in our podcast, we do it through a mental health and social justice lens. And so it's been really interesting having those conversations through those lenses and taking out the assumptions and unlearning what we've learned. JD has taught me it's really about unlearning
Well,
and relearning again. And I find it every single day as part of my life lessons.
well, you know, what I learned growing up, um, I'm realizing now so much of it was incorrect. I think if I could bring my parents back down to earth and sit them down and explain some of these things, they would be astounded. But I think they would agree that, you know, they taught us wrong to a great degree. Um, my parents always told us, that our house was open to everyone and anyone, almost like your mother's. Um, but yet we did identify that, you know, tonight we're having, my cousin and his gay friends for dinner,
Mhm,
or tomorrow night, my Black girlfriend and her parents are coming for dinner. We had labels,
mhm.
um, even though we thought that we were, you know, being gracious, and we were gracious, but we had to identify, in our own mind. Um, I remember saying to JD once in a podcast, um, because of that, I stopped looking at people as what color they are. And she didn't like that. She was very, outright, and said to me, "No, I want you to notice the color, but I want you to be aware.
Mhm.
I want you to accept it." And it was like, at first I wanted to argue with her because it was like, no, I want to just see everybody as everybody. But it was a learning lesson that I had to accept and say, yeah, because we are different, and that's okay that we're different. And we have to become aware of those differences and mingle them so we can live in peace.
Yeah. It's interesting. We had on a activist named Consciously, who is an incredible, if you don't know him, check him out. I think he's 30 years old, and he has two masters, and he's a social media phenomenon. And we had him on the podcast, and JD said to me, I just want you to do the introduction, and then I want you to talk about how you feel at the end. And so I did the introduction. And in the middle of the podcast, I started having feelings about these two Black people having a conversation about race. And I wrote on a piece of paper and held it up. And I had to contaminate their conversation with my privilege. And afterwards, JD said, how do you feel? And I couldn't find feelings. My adrenaline was rushing because I wanted to be cool and I wanted to be part of it. And I wanted them to think like, and then I sort of slowed down and talked about what it felt like from that perspective to not be invited into a conversation that I didn't belong in, and that my privilege was activated. And the next morning she called me and she said, let's talk about what happened. And we did. And I was able to come to it from a place of feeling. And I always leave and always say to JD, I just can't imagine how exhausted you must be all the time from taking care of us. Right.
Yeah.
And so that was a little window into my own privilege and to the ways in which I couldn't sit still for 30 minutes to have two people have a conversation and not be part of it. And I was really aware of my fragility and my defensiveness when she named it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to know. I want to know. Tell me. And I just think it's really important now to be able to use our platform, my voice as a white woman, to be able to say, yeah, I fuck up all the time and I have to unlearn, excuse my French. Oh my gosh, I just,
Okay, you're fine.
yeah, okay. And hopefully have other people, because it's this taboo subject still. We're
Absolutely.
not supposed to talk about, and post George Floyd, this has been happening for all our lives.
Yep.
And so, what does it take to be able to be seen and heard? It takes us as white people being able to say, shh, listen, go do your own work. Don't rely on other people to teach you. Go do your work. And that's a lifelong process and something that I commit to for the rest of my life.
Well, and I think a lot of people are trying. However, if they don't have a JD in their life,
Right.
it's going to be more difficult. Um, so on the weekend, I work as an IT specialist, and one of the young men that I work with is a black man, and most delightful young man, whether he be black, white, brown, blue, wouldn't make any difference. He has the most delightful personality I've ever worked with. And one day he asked me, he said, "Why do you feel so comfortable working with me?" And I said, "It's your personality. It has nothing to do with your history. It's just your outward personality. And that's what I like." And he said, "But I'm a black kid." And I said, "I know that because JD taught me. I had to look him straight in the eye and see, and I know he is. But his personality is delightful." And most other people in that department basically ignore him. And I feel for him, but it's not for me to tell them to be his friend, but it's for me to show them through my actions that you can be friends, because I can't, it's not up to me to teach, but it's up to me to show.
But something you just said, I not everyone has a JD in their life, but everyone has access to this. And on this is education and articles and books and podcasts. And we have to do the work.
Right.
And it's not reading one article or showing up for one. I mean, it is a lifelong commitment to unlearn and to be able to have really tough conversations that are not easy to have. And we are, at least for JD and I'm very aware of the ways that I must be oppressive and exhausting, even in our friendship, because it's unspoken and it's spoken now, and it's important. It's important to me. It's funny, another life lesson that I'm having, Karen, is that I'm getting hot flashes. So the fact, and I'm having one right now, so I'd like to share that with you. But because I didn't, my body was so destroyed by my eating disorder, I actually didn't start getting my period till I was 50 years old. So now I'm 58 and I get hot flashes.
Oh, wow.
And it's like all backwards. So I just had to share that with you if you start to see like a glimmer.
Well, I think it's so important to have these conversations, whether it be about an eating disorder, um, what is happening in the business world, uh, what is happening uh, outside our doors.
Mhm.
Okay, especially this past year. Um, one of the things I also learned was when you say Black Lives Matter, uh, it's more important to believe it and understand it rather than say all lives matter, because Black lives has to matter. Okay.
I actually remember that when JD was on the show and that she said that to you and that I know it resonated for you.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, my life has mattered. Okay. But now it's up to us to make sure that your lives matter. And we can be part of that through the dialogue. We can be part of each other's lives, whether somebody is having that eating disorder, um, or has anything else going on with them. Um, you know, we did a show the other night, and we're going to be doing more of them, called The Not Mom. And
The
these
Not
are
Mom.
the not mom. And these
Okay.
are women who have either chosen not to have children or by chance can't have children.
Hmm.
Again, what an important conversation, because I'm sure in your early marriage, there probably were people who were saying, "Oh, so when are you going to get pregnant?" I remember at my wedding, an aunt came up to me and said, "So when are you getting pregnant?" And I just looked at her and I said, "We just said I do, you know." But that made no sense to her, because to her, you get married, you have babies, um, and it bothered me that day. It was like I knew it was something that my husband and I wanted, but I didn't want anybody asking me. And now we ask women all ages, you know, and it's a choice. And our lives are choices. And our lives are choices whether we get married, not married, what our sexuality is, um, and what we want to believe in. But we shouldn't be hurting each other.
Well, you're actually, it's funny because you're talking also about the binary, meaning when you get married to a person of the opposite sex, the expectation is that you are going to have children, and the heteronormative being straight is normal and anything outside of that isn't, has contributed to this society of all these ideas about what women should do
Right.
that are antiquated and old. And now, like, thank God that the kids today are not identifying by labels or by binaries. They kind of identify, most of the kids I know, fluid, uh, queer, and it's not. And listen, sometimes labels actually help people feel connected. So I don't
Sure.
have a problem with labels when it comes to that. It helps people feel identified or grouped or connected to. It's a choice. But you're right, the ideas about what we're supposed to do at the beginning of a certain chapter of our book are literally diminishing dreams. There's no imagination in that. There's no sort of hope or connection to our inner selves and our dreams. It's following directions that other people have set that are literally socially constructed ideas
Right.
that just don't work for most people.
You are absolutely correct. I remember telling my mother when I was about 18 years old and going off to college, I said, "So I'm going to find that great lawyer or doctor, and I'm going to get married. And then I'm going to move back to this neighborhood, and we're going to live just down the road from you. And Friday nights we'll have dinner, and Sunday mornings we'll have brunch," because that's what I saw my cousins doing. And that's what I thought I wanted. And then here I go away to college, and the first guy that shows me any interest, I get married to. And we don't move near my mother. We moved totally out of state, away from everything. And I was miserable because in my mind, I had planted I was going to be like everybody else. And it wasn't until we got divorced that I could sit back and say, wait a second, what do I want? And who am I? Um, and will tell you that shook my mother up quite a bit. It was like,
I'll
wait a minute.
bet.
But as she got older, she learned to accept it. And it's made my relationship with my boys much better because I don't set expectations. They are going to be who they want to be, live their life the way they want to. My door is always open. But you know what? I'm not going to tell them who to date, who not to date, where to live, where not to live.
That they are very lucky boys. They are very lucky boys. So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
So what have you discovered about yourself that you didn't know prior to this pandemic this year?
The biggest thing that I didn't know about myself was that um, I really could be somewhat stationary. Um, you know, before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, I had knee surgery. But prior to my knee surgery, every day I was either at the grocery store or I was going to see a client. I had all the podcasting done right here in the studio. So I was entertaining people as well as recording. And I thought that was something I really needed. But once I felt that, the pandemic came and I couldn't go out, I realized that this is better for me because I'm taking that time to breathe. I'm taking that time to determine what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And before that, it was pleasing everybody else, you know, going to the grocery store to pick up an extra loaf of bread because, my son wanted rye bread instead of white bread. Um, or going and getting a bottle of wine because, a friend of mine says, we got to get together tonight and celebrate something. I don't need to do that anymore. I
Mhm.
do it by choice, not because
Mhm.
I feel everyone wants me to.
Does it feel like liberation?
Oh, it's huge liberation.
Yeah,
Hardest part has been watching people suffer this past year
yeah.
and not being able to give somebody a hug and be there for them. Having a brother on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, and um, not being able to see them. Uh,
Mhm.
and Zoom only gives you so much, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, I'm grateful for this Zoom experience. And I think what a lot of people have really realized is resiliency, and that we have more resiliency than we thought we had,
absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being on. I
Thank
also
you.
want to thank you for the upcoming Age March.
Oh, that's Barbara Rosebrooker all the
I
way.
I
And you.
know, but you've helped her. It's her dream and it's her idea, and I give her 100% credit. But you took it, you're helping take it to the next step. And I can't thank you enough because in July, the two of us were doing a podcast together and she brought it up and I said, "Oh, we could do it on Zoom," as if I knew what I was talking about. I had no idea. But I figured, okay, so we'll do a panel discussion or something. But you saw that if we were going to really make this happen, you had to get the team together that you did. And I
Well, listen, my mother is an anomaly. She's an 84-year-old badass who wants to be a movie star and will be. And the Age March is really to fight systemic racism, not racism, ageism. Sorry, it all goes together.
does, no,
Um,
it does.
and and I'm really proud of her for holding on to this dream, and hopefully for decades to come, this is something that we'll celebrate like gay pride every year, age pride. And so just a shout out to the team, which is Colonel Achilles and Julie Stern and Matt Jackson and you and Barbara for really, and Donnie Osborne for putting all of this together, because it's been a labor of love. And it premieres on the 27th at 1 o'clock on Instagram Live and Facebook Live.
And it's a Saturday afternoon. I had to confirm that today. So, you know what? It's still going to be cold, everybody. So it would be a great idea just to be sitting at your computers and streaming it live. A lot of excitement. And I understand we have a great guest host.
We have great guest hosts and we have celebrities, and it's going to be a celebration. And you're going to be on it.
I'm going to be there.
Yes,
I'll be wearing
yes.
my hat. I'm not sure I'm going to be wearing the t shirt, though.
Well, yeah, okay. I'll be wearing the cap too.
All right. Well, have a great day. Thank you again.
Thank you, Karen.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.